Hello and welcome to Tigers by the Fire, a podcast out of Holy Cross High School highlighting World War II stories and discussions. Today I am here with Louis Voillon.
Hello.
And Mitch Riera.
Hi.
And we're going to be looking at the Manhattan Project and the dropping of the nuclear bombs. So I'm going to let Louis, I guess without further ado, you're going to start us off. And so take it over.
So the Manhattan Project was created by the Army Corps of Engineers on August 13th, 1942. Other powers in the war started researching uranium weapons, and Albert Einstein actually brought this problem to FDR, telling him about the issue and kind of warning him to start a process to maybe look into this and start it.
Yeah, the fear with, I think, when Einstein brought it to him was that this project was already being worked on in Germany, correct?
Yeah, so he and other countries kind of were looking at it, and that's when FDR kind of was like, let's actually start looking into this. And the project itself cost about $2.2 billion, and it was over 37 sites wide. And that's not just building the bomb, but that's including everything from the B-29 bombers to just the process of fission, which is what creates the explosion.
Yeah, when we say 37 sites, there are multiple scientific research laboratories, some at colleges, as you'll highlight later, some military installations. They're all working on different aspects of the bomb. And that's what makes the Manhattan Project, I think, so unique amongst scientific research, is that you really don't have but a handful of people who know the big picture.
Yeah, and
smaller things.
And there were the amount of workers that didn't know what they were doing, what the bigger picture of what they were doing was crazy. There was about 130,000 people that worked on this over the wide range of everything, and it was just none of them knew about it.
And I think that a lot of historical textbooks or articles lack in explaining the fact that a lot of people moved to the United States to work on this project also without knowing what they're actually working on, because we see lots of scientists come from Canada, England, and Germany to come work on this project.
A couple of people that were in charge of it. Well, Colonel Leslie Groves was appointed the head of the Manhattan Engineering District, which was kind of where this was located originally. And within 2 days of this appointment, he was promoted to a brigadier general. And bringing in some of where the colleges come in, Robert Oppenheimer was a professor at UC Berkeley, and he took the lead role of a scientist in the construction of the process that created the bomb. So, and this process is called self-sustaining nuclear fission. It's a chain reaction of nucleuses splitting from contact with other particles, releasing energy.
Oppenheimer is kind of an interesting guy because I think he gets, after this, he kind of really reflects on what he's actually done. It becomes pretty interesting. But I think it's important to note that Oppenheimer, it's Oppenheimer, not Einstein, that does this. And a lot of Americans, for whatever reason, seem to think that Albert Einstein made the nuclear bomb in like a basement for whatever, because he just thought of it. But it's all these different great minds, including his, contributing to it. So I think that's important.
Yeah, and so some of the main, Mitch, why don't you tell us about some of the main areas where, like, colleges that this was created at?
Well, there's three main colleges that really contributed to it. So the first one is UC Berkeley under Ernest Lawrence, where we begin to see the electromagnetic process be created to work towards this bomb. The second one is Columbia University, where the diffusion process began to be created under Harold Urey. And then the third one is the thermal diffusion process under Philip Hogg Abelson, which was done at University of Chicago. And one thing to note is that these three colleges are all, like, definitely today's eyes, are very high-end colleges, very academically strong colleges. So I'd like to keep that noted.
And talking about these, and these scientists knew what they were working towards, and they knew that they were working with these odd materials, but they were kind of all, I talked about the span of the Manhattan Project, how it wasn't just the secret governmental facilities in the middle of nowhere that were, of course there were those, but these are big colleges that there were students constantly going to, and just kind of out in the open. And so when picking these places of research and everything, you had to have a lot of utilities like water, electricity, and one of the most important workers to work on the project. So
yeah, I would like to kind of head towards one of the bigger facilities, which was considered the headquarters of the Manhattan District, Oak Ridge, which was built by the Army Corps of Engineers. And in 1945, it was the residence of 75,000 workers. And we actually have a quote from one of the workers, Wilma Gray, and she said that the living conditions was less than appealing place to live. So you can obviously see that the United States had a goal to finish this project, taking more importance towards the actual project and the people working on the actual project.
Yeah, so, and what I think is, when I was researching, one of the most, kind of mind-blowing facts about this was, before 1943, when when there was an actual production of fissionable material, this bomb was just theoretical. Nobody actually knew what they were going to do with it and how it was going to work. It was just this idea out there that somebody was just it was going to happen, and there was different ways that they could possibly do this, but no one really knew about how exactly this would be until Arthur Holly Compton, who was at the University of Chicago. He found the only way to produce fissionable material with plutonium-239. This was done by transmutation, which is taking one element and making a completely other out of uranium-238. And to complete this process, this was done at a production facility on the Columbia River in Washington, and this property was 1,000 square miles of just property isolated out in the middle of nowhere on this river because of talking about the utilities that there was a source of water, and it's kind of out there, so nobody was going to go find it.
And so once we started having this actual material, it came time to actually do a test with it. This is the only actual test we see done with it, and that is the Trinity test that was performed July 6, 1948. And this was done at the Alamogordo Air Base. And to kind of throw some numbers in there, we see 13 pounds of plutonium used for the experiment, which is equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. And the way that was performed was that scientists about 10,000 feet away were in a bunker watching the experiment go down, and they placed this bomb on top of a steel tower with multiple scientific instruments surrounding it to get measurements. And when they detonated it, we see the steel tower completely evaporate, and an 800-foot radius of sand turn into glass, which I find extremely fascinating. That blew my mind when I read that.
So I kind of want to go back to creating the bomb. Oppenheimer created Los Alamos, which he basically created a city to build the atom bomb. This city was 300 buildings, 77 square miles, and it was housed like Oak Ridge. It was housed for many people who were just working on this project. They weren't sure, and this goes from not just scientists. This goes to the janitors and the people who work daily jobs.
There's a wide variety of people who work there. Yeah, you have clerical positions, you have schools that are there, stuff like. I mean, it's a big place.
Yeah, and this is the place where they actually, I would say, assembled and helped build the bomb. So after the Trinity test, we moved to the actual dropping and use of the bombs. So
the first bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima August 6, 1948. Oh, my bad. 1945. If Louis, you want to talk more about that.
So a manufacturing center, it was dropped on a manufacturing center about 500 miles away from Tokyo. The population was 350,000 people. It took off, the plane who dropped it took off the plane in Enola Gay, which was oddly named after the pilot's mother, took off and dropped the bomb over Hiroshima and killed about 140,000 people. This is, if you look at it, it's close to the number of people that actually worked on the bomb and built it. It's actually more. This destroyed 5 square miles of city, and this is one of the gun-type uranium bombs.
And then the second bomb, which was dropped 3 days later on August 9th, was Fat Man, and it was dropped on Nagasaki. The reason for dropping a second bomb was because after the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima, Japan didn't surrender. And so this was an implosive type plutonium bomb, And the original target was supposed to be Kokura, a city in Japan, but because of cloud coverage, they had to go to their second target, Nagasaki. And the death toll was roughly 70,000 people, and it destroyed about 3 square miles. And the reason why it wasn't as much as Little Boy is because Nagasaki is a city within a valley, so that kind of helped contain the damage.
Yeah, and I think, too, the raw numbers are always off. The U.S. underestimates how many people are killed because they also don't account necessarily for all the people who die in the weeks after, which is a tremendous amount. And then the months and years after of people who died because of exposure to radiation. And the fact that those areas are cancer hotbeds even to this day tell a lot about that, that story. Now, the dropping the bomb, I think, is kind of interesting. And Mitch, you brought this up, that after they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, there was a message to the Japanese basically saying, surrender or we drop one in another week. And the Japanese immediately, without dialogue, respond with no. And there's actually an internal dialogue going forward in Japan to negotiate a surrender. But we dropped the second one before that week timetable was up because they'd already said no. And at that point, the Japanese are going to be, obviously signing an armistice and getting out of the war. So, but it's an interesting, I think, proposition too. These bombs don't explode on impact; they explode above the Earth's surface. The fires that occur after are pretty long lasting in some of these areas, and the fallout obviously is something that we didn't, I think, completely know about.
And looking after like the Trinity test where the steel tower basically vaporized, imagine what this does to people who are just walking down the street or just in the city. Like there's pictures of, like we looked at pictures in class and it's just crazy what happens due to these, like just this weapon, how deadly and destructional it is. How
their shadows are literally stained onto the side of buildings and sidewalks.
Yeah, the shadow thing I think is always one that stands out to a lot of people. And the other part too is we have to fully acknowledge that Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these are not necessarily military targets. And some people have kind of said, well, they had military people in there. Well, so did every city in Japan. Right. But these are just normal cities. This would be like if they dropped a nuclear bomb on Kansas City or something like that. It's just an average Japanese city. They're not the biggest Japanese cities, not the smallest Japanese cities, just kind of an average sized city. Right.
And this was, I think, different than it was kind of a different message than you would see with the fire bombings like in Tokyo, or like it's a different level of just like, I don't know. It's just like the amount of damage it did in such a small time. Like the fire bombings were over a longer period of time, even though it inflicted a lot of damage in a short time. This was like instantly there was so much destruction.
Yeah, and I think they're related in a couple different ways. Well, keep in mind the firebombing in Tokyo that destroys large portions of the city is really just in a 12-hour period of time. But it's the amount of bombers needed. I mean, you had to launch up thousands of B-29s, while in this is just one plane dropping a bomb, one bomb, and it destroys the entire city. And that was firepower that really no one had seen before.
And that was what I think Einstein, we talked about earlier, was scared of, that the Germans were starting to look into, and this is why he came to FDR and other scientists from around the world came to America, were like, this is something that we need to look at and needs to be handled with care, not just, let's see how deadly this could be. Kind of just, be careful with it. And I want to talk about how, so the source we use in class, by Donald Miller, his book, it says, there was a quote in it saying, there were two of us on the plane, two of us, both Navy men. The other was a captain, William D. Parsons, the Manhattan Project Chief of Weapons Development, who flew the Hiroshima mission. We oversaw the bomb since the crews knew nothing about the bomb. I think that, to me, just is crazy, the secrecy of it. These soldiers didn't know what they were doing. There's a couple of them, and it shows that, there's only two people on the plane that had a couple of, more people on that didn't know what they were dropping. It was just, here's your orders, go and do this and achieve the mission.
Yeah, and the pilots, I mean, the people on the planes, they kind of understand there's something different, obviously, about it, and there's a little slight forewarnings, but by and large, no one, I think, knew the exact ramifications that were going to be from dropping this, and they specifically aren't going to tell them the damage is going to occur, even though we do calculate it fairly accurately prior.
And speaking on damage and the mentioning of the Tokyo fire bombings, I kind of want to do a simple comparison of a lot of the explosives that we're familiar with from this war compared to the actual atomic bombs. So at first, I would like to start with the German steel hand grenade, which has about a 5 to 6 foot radius of damage. And that's still not definite to kill somebody, but that's a very small area. And the second one is the American hand grenade, which has about a 12-foot radius of damage. It's a shrapnel grenade, and it can spread a lot farther than the German one. And then we get to the Tokyo bombings, the fire bombings. We see 6,700 500-pound bombs used for this. And we see 16 square miles destroyed and burned to the ground with this. If you compare that to the little boy, there's less square miles being destroyed with 5 square miles, but only with one 9,700-pound bomb. And there's also some accounts of people seeing damage such as shattered glass windows 26,000 feet away. And when it comes to Fat Man, which was 3 square miles of damage, the bomb was only 10,800 pounds. And if you compare that to the fire bombings with 6,700 500-pound bombs, the math of that is absolutely insane ratio-wise.
Yeah, and discussing like the dropping of the bomb, this is kind of, it goes to like who knew about it and who worked on it, because we see Harry Truman, who became president not long before this happened, he kind of was surprised by it because when FDR died, it was kind of because of how secretive this was, he didn't know about it, and he was and just like the level of how secretive this was kind of was insane, because like somebody came up to him and was like, hey, since you're in charge now, we have to discuss this. And there's just different it's just the wide span of people who were in charge of this.
Yeah, Truman, keep in mind, Truman, FDR dies in April of 1945, and so Truman's only been vice president for 3 months. He was not vice president the previous 4 years. It was just for this 3 months. And so he is not in on a lot of the major developments that have been taking place. I mean, he didn't know about Ultra. He didn't know about really the B-29s and all the different things that went into those. So when Truman takes over, he has to kind of catch up quick. And you're right, the Manhattan Project is something he finds out about a little later.
The day FDR died, he was briefed about it, and he actually wrote this, like in his diary, talks about him being just kind of briefed on this big plan that was like, hey, we have one of the most deadliest weapons right now. And the next day he was fully briefed by the Secretary of War, who was Harry Stinson, along with the Army General. Truman on that day, he approved the continuation of the project and set up a team that actually was, their main job was to inform him on how and when to use the bomb and what was the best kind of way to go about this situation, now that this is this big problem that he is kind of briefed on last minute.
Yeah. And there was a debate too whether or not we should share this technology with the other allies,
Yeah, and I think when he comes in, he's kind of looking at like one of his like main questions, I believe, would be like, well, are we the only one that has this, or how close are other people? Like,
we also know that, like how you said, Albert Einstein informed the U.S. that Germany was working on it, and we did know that they were a little bit, I think they said roughly 4 years behind us when it comes to the actual technology of creating the bomb.
Yeah.
But there was still the concern of Russia being able to create such a bomb, and so that was probably the biggest concern about it. When it comes to communism as a whole, we are more concerned about if we have the ability to end communism, the spread of communism from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union having the power to flip it and continue spreading communism because of the power they have by having these weapons.
Yeah, that was another issue. I mean, Truman, obviously, as we know, historically becomes a very ardent anti-communist, the Truman Doctrine, domino theory. And he chooses not to share this with Stalin, the information about this, though Stalin knows about it already because they had spies. What I find always interesting, too, is the German aspect. The Germans, in everything I've read, that's usually the kind of the quote they give you is about 4 years away. Realistically, it's way
Right.
way bigger than that.
And I think
they're not even close at this point. Keep in mind, the Russians won't have one until 1949.
Right.
And that's only after they get stuff from us illegally. Well, they take it from us, but either way, it's only after they get information from us and German scientists who have been working, and that's still 4 years after this.
Yeah, and I think we're more worried about the after effects of what would happen if we don't share this information, or if we do share this information, how it could affect not the end of the war, because I think America as a whole can see the war coming to an end with, because at this point the Germans are kind of falling and they're close to the end in the...
Well, yeah, when Truman takes over, right, Hitler commits suicide at the end of that month, and
Right.
the Germans by, I guess right now, what are we on? We're May 6th right now? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at this point in 1945, they're surrendering and they're signing an armistice and they're out the war. And so what we're going to see is over the next couple of months, right, and we know what happened at Yalta at the beginning of the year, and then we know what's going to happen at Potsdam, where Stalin is essentially going to make it a point saying, look, I'm keeping Eastern Europe. And so there is now this Cold War that's developing. And then it becomes the focus on Japan. How do you end the war?
Right. And then how do you keep another war from starting like the first time it happened?
Correct.
How do you keep peace? And I think that's what kind of the American idea of like anti-communism is kind of the big question, because you wonder how like that idea kind of like the sense of that idea sways Truman's decision on whether to share it or not, because like Truman was briefed by somebody saying that the bomb would scare the Soviet Union and kind of stop the spread of communism possibly. And how true that is, I don't know, but it's kind of that question that everybody at that time was scared, didn't want communism, was against it, and that's what they were most scared of.
And to play devil's advocate, I mean, if you're Joseph Stalin, who's just had the Germans invade Russia and modern estimates over 20 million. He probably thinks it's around 10 to 15 at that point of his people have died. Not that Stalin's the most heartfelt individual in the world, but now that you're going to get lied to, even though you know this country's working on this weapon, and then they're going to show you that they have this weapon at the end of the war, there's probably a lack of trust that has now been complete. Even if there was very little trust with Truman after Potsdam, it's completely eroded after the dropping of the atomic bombs.
And I think that's what is kind of most people are scared of. And that brings to the question of what was the right thing to do about the bomb? Like, was it right to drop it, or should they have kept it to themselves and kind of let other people come along with this power? So
I think in that debate, should they have dropped it, we should probably preface what the war plans were for the next 6 months for the Allies. I mean, there's multiple proposed invasions of Japan. There's a few different ones. A few different operations, and they usually, you're talking over 1 million Americans going into Japan doing amphibious and aerial drops with the airborne. Army, Marines, Navy, everything would be basically thrown over to Japan. In fact, a lot of the airborne units were being redistributed right at the end of that summer anyway. And so the question becomes, what are the sustainable losses going to be? And some people, I think, overestimate this. Some people talk about how the fact that the War Department ordered around 900,000 body bags.
Right. And I think that the problem with like the future planning is, after seeing like the island hopping campaign, just the intensity of the Japanese and how they're so willing to die for their country, and their kind of just like worship of the emperor, who like everything's for the emperor and for the country and for honor, and they have such a sense of kind of like, I'll die for anything. And you see this with like their whole like entirety of the war.
It's not just the military people, it's the civilians too, because we've learned throughout the year about how when we take over an island, the residents of the island, the non-military residents, prefer to kill themselves rather than to surrender because of what they've heard of Americans. And I think this is where we really see media take such a large part in this war on both sides, for the propaganda of Americans for the Japanese, where these giant monsters that are coming to slaughter these local villages, and then the other way around, we see our own American bodies lined up on the beaches of these small islands like Peleliu and all the Mariana Islands. We see the pure brutality of the Japanese. And so the home front if they were to know about this actual bomb, I feel like it would have been, I wouldn't say highly supported, but I feel like if it was a 50-50, more people would be supporting the dropping of the bomb than not.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think, and even in democratic society, you shouldn't really be polling the populace on how to conduct military. The Athenians ran into that in the Peloponnesian Wars. But the big question about whether or not, if Americans would have supported it, I don't even think this debate was even had much until much later, like probably 40 years after the event, did people really start to look at it and say, wait a second, this is kind of a humanitarian issue. We bomb cities. And, Louis brought up, and both of you guys brought up, at Saipan, I mean, you had tens of thousands of civilians that committed suicide and jumped off of, mountaintops and drowned themselves in the ocean. At Okinawa, which at this point is right before this, right? The Okinawa invasion. You had thousands of citizens who committed suicide. You had suicide, improvised explosives. You had kamikazes that took off.
Slaughtering their own children, too.
Right, because they just didn't, they were so
concerned.
Yes.
Now, what I wouldn't do is take that naive approach and just say, well, we dropped 2 nuclear bombs to save all the populace. I don't think that's...
Right, because it's still, like, civilians we dropped it on. That's what some people you hear talk about, well, why didn't we just drop a warning shot, like, shot across the bow saying, like, hey, we have this power, you should be scared of us, like...
Firebomb 12 cities.
Right.
That was the shot across the bow. And the reality for the Japanese government is they knew at this point we could destroy any city in their country that we wanted to. And the nuclear bomb was that big kind of punch that says we can not only do it, but if we have these, and the Japanese did not know how many we had, because we don't have 30 of them to just drop. We had the 2, and then they're developing more after. If they think we have 20 of them, then, I mean, we could systematically eradicate the entire country. And so that's what they're faced with. They're faced with the annihilation or surrender. And it made it, I think, a little easier for Hirohito to actually get his military to agree to surrender, because that was a big issue, too. The military did not want to surrender. And
right, because
they committed suicide, too.
After surrendering, like after Japan surrendered, weren't there still soldiers who kept fighting because they thought it was wrong to surrender and that it wasn't?
Not as many as you would think. There are a lot of soldiers who kept fighting because they didn't know the surrender took place. Some of the major generals, there was this weird 12-hour period where there was almost a coup in Tokyo, but it didn't happen, and a lot of the major generals ended up committing suicide, ritualistic suicide.
Do you think it would have been different if somebody other than America had developed this bomb first? Would it have been used in a different way instead of kind of looking at the moral side of it?
Who are we talking about?
Yeah.
Right.
If you're talking about the Germans, then Russia would have been completely destroyed, because they would have easily dropped it on Russia.
Right.
I like to bring up a possible argument that a lot of people who are uneducated in this topic try to bring up about is why didn't we target a more militarized city or a capital city like Tokyo? And people have we kept on saying during this podcast is Tokyo is in ashes right now. It's gone. We've done that, and how you said, we've already fired those warning shots. There's really nothing much else to hit at this point, and they're still not surrendering.
And if you drop it on Tokyo and kill the emperor in a nuclear blast, then you've just created the most powerful martyr, in modern history.
Right.
And the people of Japan are going to fight because they're going to look at us as just murder. There's a reason we don't target the imperial palace.
Yeah, and I think that one of the questions I had when researching about this topic, it was being one of the people who was working at one of these facilities, when talking about these people, there's one quote I found that said, we didn't know what they were really doing. It wasn't up to us, but it was strange materials that we were working with. And that kind of people can put 2 and 2 together and realize that they were actually helping create this mass bomb, and that they were part of these mass killings of civilians. How would that make the American populate, the 130,000 people who worked on this project, feel? Would that affect them?
Well, one thing that kind of has been as we started doing research for this podcast has been sticking in my head is that I do believe that lying to these workers was a necessity, but also the thought that there's people that went to their graves not knowing that they were a part of the mass bombing of an entire city. That's just kind of mind-boggling to me.
Like, who's to blame for it? Is it the actual workers who put this together, the scientists who researched the ways to produce these bombs and how to create this mass destruction, or is it the people who decided to drop it and who decided where the target was?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question to really, wrap your head around. I mean, obviously, I don't think the workers are as much to blame because they're kind of just ants in the big scheme of things. Right. And ultimately, the order to drop it is a high from the president order. This is not anything that the individual worker could do. So, I mean, I don't necessarily blame the workers. And I agree. I think you had to keep it secret for the success of the project.
I don't think that was a choice, kind of, because I think it would... telling the civilian population that, hey, you're helping create a mass destruction bomb would not go over well, because I don't think there would be much support over it if you're telling them that this is going on citizens.
Well, it would leak out, obviously. I mean, no matter how quiet you try to keep it, and stuff did leak out, but yeah.
Yeah, we see that with how you say, like, we've learned that the Russians had the best spy, like, organization and throughout this entire war, and how we kept it so secret that their own workers working on this had no idea what they're working on, but another country was still able to figure out what we were doing. So if we were to give that out to the public, that would have just completely ruined our opportunity to end the war like we did.
Do you think it was easier to drop it on like Japan than it would have been like Germany or some other European country, like because of such a race difference? Like, do you think that was like, because I think that like when we read about it, we see such a like dehumanization of soldiers from other like enemy lines. Like in Germany, we see that they are or reading about the Japanese island invasions and everything, we see like our soldiers describe them as like animals, and they see them as non-human because of like these acts of violence they're committing, and just kind of like the toll they would go to. Like we talked about how they would come in at night and just raid at night when our soldiers were sleeping. That's kind of like, was it a difference? Do you think there was a difference in why we dropped it on Japan and not like a European country?
I mean, the Japanese definitely like to play with the Americans' heads, like how we've seen accounts of people sharing a foxhole and them coming and slitting one of the people's throats, but leaving the other one alive. Like that's the biggest, like, that's PTSD at its finest.
Right.
And there's obviously race. That's just the human nature of when there's opposition amongst people who have different cultures, different language, different physical features, that you're going to see that in war. You see that throughout history in war, throughout history in slavery. It's just how the human mind works. That the thing, someone told this to me, and it made lots of sense, where it's like, we're scared. We're born scared of things that we don't know and don't recognize, like ourselves. And the best way of portraying our scaredness is hate. And so that's how I see this propaganda spreading around on both sides. So I definitely believe that race played a ginormous role in the reason why we chose Japan. Like, I believe that we would have chose Japan over Germany, even if Germany wasn't already a couple weeks away from surrender.
Because
at this point they're already out. Yeah, they've been out. They were out
because there's that similarity between the Europeans and Americans.
They're predominantly white. That's about as simple as you can put it.
Well, I think too it goes a little bit beyond that. I think the big feeling, and it was an accurate feeling at the beginning of 1945, was that the only thing holding Germany together was Hitler, and once Hitler was gone, they would surrender, and that proved to be the case. Once he committed suicide, they surrendered, and we just watched, obviously, downfall in class, and you kind of see that, where a lot of the generals are really ready for this to be over.
And they had been ready for a while, it seemed like.
At that point, by about 1944, especially once we landed in Normandy, I mean, the writing is essentially on the wall. The bombings are taking place in German cities every day, and so they are ready for this to be over, and the Japanese simply didn't have that same pressure. we're only bombing their cities for a solid year in terms of like the big rates that we do, which is late 44 into 45, because we had just taken those islands. But the Japanese seemingly held on to this fight or die mentality. Keep in mind, we have German POWs everywhere. We're shipping them overseas to the U.S. They're living in Alabama. They're in Florida, and Japan's POWs are very small. I mean, before Saipan, we had less than 1,000 POWs. I mean, it's crazy. So that is, I think, the biggest difference. It would have been race. I mean, it would have been an interesting thing if it had actually gotten to that. Initially, the bomb is designed for Germany. That's the initial plan for it. But it definitely switches to the Japanese, I think, as the war develops onward, just by the nature of that, the way that war went.
Yeah, and I think just like after dropping it, the question of what happens after, like the secret's out, like just what's going to happen now, because every other country is going to want one and say we need one, and then where is the limit beyond that? Just saying, hey, these are now everybody has the capability of mass destruction because we came up with this process and we created the first atom bomb.
You also have over 100,000 people that are just getting this information that they were a part of a mass destruction of a city and mass killing of people. So there's going to be some internal conflict within the United States because of it.
Yeah, and I think going forward too, you have to look at the ramifications. Obviously, to this day, there's deals with nuclear proliferation with Iran, with North Korea, and seemingly that desire for these states to still have nuclear weapons. And then the other argument, I think, is an interesting one, and I think this will be we'll kind of close it with this. Did the dropping of the nuclear bomb prevent future large-scale conflict, especially between the Soviet Union and the U.S.?
I would say so, because I think this is kind of like opening the bag of like war will never be the same again. Like, even though we see like studying the different wars we've studied in world history, there's something new about it. And I think with the atom bomb being dropped, there will never be another war of man against man. I think it's just kind of like it won't be a large scale of that. I think it's now we're capable of doing mass destruction of other like countries without using a whole bunch of our troops and there's a lot of like drone strikes we see now. Like, it's just kind of evolving, and I think that this kind of nobody really wanted to talk about what it opened up and how it could. I think everybody's still scared of it, that just mutual destruction, that there could be, like, if we drop one on somebody else, they're going to drop it on us. And I think that idea of being scared is what has kept only 2 of them being dropped on other countries.
What do you think, Mitch?
I think I agree with Lou on this, that in our nature, we're trying our hardest to get the humans out of war as much as possible. Instead of playing chess with a bunch of little soldiers and a bunch of pawns moving us around from city to city, we were trying to evolve to protect our people by, one, either defending ourselves in war and also keeping us physically out of the war, but like how you're saying, drone strikes and all that kind of stuff. But I also think this helps prevent more war when we're not physically seeing each other face to face, and we're all either sitting behind computer screens at this point with that big red button, quote unquote. And so I think no one really wants to be that person to press that button when it comes to the big nuclear weapons that we hear about in today's news and all that stuff, how we just have every country, United States, Russia, North Korea, how there's just piles and piles that we can imagine of nuclear bombs. I really don't think anyone wants to be that person to click that button. So I think it was good in the helping the prevention of future nuclear war.
Yeah, and I think just because because only one person, like one country, had the capability of doing this, I think that's what kind of kept it being like out there in the open now and nobody retaliating because nobody else had the power to retaliate. And I think that's what's important, because I think if somebody else had the capability of dropping another one, I think they would have, and it would have opened like a larger can of worms. How now back and forth, we haven't seen that before. It's just kind of now it's out there and nobody wants to do it again.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the idea that once Russia develops it, instead of it being a war on the ground, it's now going to be a war of nuclear weapons, and no one wins that war. So, well, guys, thank you. That was a good job. This is our last podcast of the school year, and that was episode 9 on the Manhattan Project. Thank you, Louie. Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.